Thanks, John, and thanks, Dolores, for joining me today. And I suppose maybe to kind of start things off, if you want to tell people maybe what are your roles in the placement department?
Yeah, Dolores, you can fire away first.
Great, I will do. Hi, Danny. Thanks for having us here today. So my own name is Dolores McMahon, and I work in the practice placements department at ICHAS. So I guess predominantly my role is to work with the students and support them as much as possible in when it comes to them trying to find their practice placements. A lot of that involves helping them in relation to their documentation, helping in relation to resources for contact with placement providers and clinical supervisors. Which also gives us the opportunity, and myself the opportunity, to liaise directly with some of the placement providers and with some of the clinical supervisors. And we're lucky to have quite a wide network of people that we get to work with as well.
Thanks, Dolores. And my name is John Hickey, and I work as the clinical liaison person within the college to connect with and contact potential placement providers and indeed, current placement providers that we have on our books at the moment. A big part of the role would be to ensure that the placement providers are providing the sort of the right type of environment for students going into work as student therapists, really. It also involves building up, connections and ongoing relationships with placement providers, and indeed being a support there for not only the students but indeed the placement providers as well, should they have any queries or questions or concerns, indeed, from a clinical perspective regarding some of our students. So as Dolores explained, there's a lot of different sort of, responsibilities within the roles that we carry out, and it is really trying to ensure that we keep the students, the college, and indeed the placement providers in our orbit, so to speak, and to ensure that the students get a quality experience and the placement providers get a good experience as well, indeed, of the students and of the college.
And one question I was thinking of asking as well is in terms of just with placement itself, if you had to describe in a sentence or two what practice placement is to, say, somebody who would have never heard of it before, how would you go about doing that?
I think it's probably, I suppose, kind of best described as the outlet for how students can relate their theory to practice. So, they do this practice placement in line with their respective modules that they do. So while they're going out on practice placement, they're also still studying. So it allows them that opportunity to try and relate that theory to practice with the support of the lecturers, their clinical supervisors, and their placement providers. So it's essentially them getting to go out on placement and sit with clients either in a group setting or on a one-to-one basis, and to be able to try and put those skills to use within that environment.
So that kind of summarizes as well for you, John, or would you add anything?
Yeah, I think I'd agree. Yeah, absolutely. Danny, I think Dolores has hit the nail on the head. I think if you look at the undergraduate programme itself, there's major themes that would run through the programme. You'd look at sort of person development, you'd look at theoretical orientation, you'd look at applied practice, to name but a few concepts that would run through the programme. And it's trying to ensure that, as Dolores said, that the student takes their breadth and depth of learning and knowledge and actually then puts that into practice with within the real world, really, and getting that experience. And the same would go for the master's students as well, that they would take all the theory and the self-development, self-awareness, experiential type of learning too, and encapsulate that and put that into a practice placement perspective, and again into the real world perspective when we're working with clients.
So
and I think
great.
Yeah, and I think for anyone, I suppose, that has never carried out a practice placement within that area as well, or maybe have not kind of come across it in their own previous studies as well, is that, it is a big step into the practice placement as well. But, the supports are there. And as John mentioned, things like personal development, that all helps people. So for anybody who is, ever kind of worried about, that element about going into practice placement and going into the field, the support structure is really, really good there for the students as well. They do have a lot of access to help and further development within their area as well.
Cool. That kind of goes to the support section as well for that. And like from your own side of things as well, kind of like at any given time, how many students would normally be out on placement from the college?
We could have over and above 300 students on practice placement at any one time across level 7, level 8 and level 9. So it's quite a big number of students going out on placement. We're lucky that we do have quite a number of placement providers that we've worked with over the years who are familiar with our students and the programs and the requirements as well. So it is a good number of students going out on placement every year. A lot of, I suppose, managing with this in relation to supporting them, but also, the students have their own documentation that they work on to get back to the college as well. So it is definitely a really structured process for them as well.
And you mentioned even the kind of the placement providers themselves, like approximately, like how many would you be working with at the moment? Because like that's a lot of students to be also trying to coordinate.
Yeah, so I guess probably about 150 plus placement providers. Obviously, it can give and take. Sometimes we can be lucky enough where more placement providers are looking for students at that particular time, or sometimes it may be slightly reduced. But in general, we're lucky to be able to accommodate as many students as possible with the practice placement, but in and around 150 plus placement providers at the moment. So it's really good at the moment.
And say even with those providers, like how varied are the sectors that they're involved in?
So you'd have anything from addiction counselling services, youth counselling services, I guess general mainstream counselling as well. So there would be quite a wide range, which is really good for us that we have those affiliations with those placement providers, because we offer programs that are, addiction counselling related, youth counselling related, integrative and things like that as well. So and psychotherapy. So there is a real network of placement providers for the students to connect with out there.
Yeah, well, I think we've added to that as well, Dolores. I think we've, looking at the master's program as well, we've got the family therapy stream, and
yes.
and it's important as well, I think, from a from a student perspective and a placement perspective, that we always try, Danny, to match the students' sort of educational and competency levels with the type of placement provider and the type of clients that placement provider will provide. So if you're at level 7, which is generally your third year of a program, it'll be your very first step into working with clients. So we try to ensure that the placement providers are obviously very aware of this, and they would match a client with the level of competency or experience that a student has, so as to not overwhelm a student and to make sure they don't work outside their sort of clinical competence. And that would be another area of input and responsibility that we would have to ensure that that this is followed through by the placement providers.
And then it links on as well to, Dolores, you mentioned kind of the supports, and even John, you're highlighting there, like for a lot of these students, it's the first time they're kind of going out into the big bad world when it comes to counselling and that. So like just going through a bit more detail, like what kind of supports do you offer to students when they're out on placement too? Because it does sound like very much, it can be daunting, especially when you're going from the theoretical to now they're actually applying what they would have learned in the classroom to real world settings, and also to a wide range of diverse different groups and people.
So from a supportive perspective, I suppose, Danny, we, you've got to think, I suppose, generally the student will have been within the educational system for, if they're on the master's program, maybe a year, at undergraduate level, about 2 years before they start to branch out into applied practice. So they have a sort of a very strong supportive network. They're very familiar with the lecturers. They're very familiar with the the college structure, you know, and all that surrounds it. Practical supports from a placements perspective is that we're generally at the end of an email or a phone. If, you know, something crops up for a student, we'd always try to respond quite quickly and support them in whatever way that we can. And that could be anything from having some difficulty with the placement provider themselves, having some difficulty perhaps even with, you know, a client within the placement itself, or indeed struggling to find a placement. We would do what we can to support a student, you know, into placement in that regard. The student themselves, they also have a supportive, sort of an external supportive structure where it's mandatory for them to engage in clinical supervision, you know, and so for every 5 or 8 hours, depending on the program that you're on, you'd have to engage with your clinical supervisor, who will be there to support you and guide you and help you through your placement process as well. So we try to, as much as we can, we try to make sure the student is very well supported from a very holistic perspective, you know, within the placement process.
And even generally as well, kind of what have you found to be the experience for the students who have been on placement? So they've gone through the experience of just kind of working with organizations, and like when they come back to you and just even come when they're going back, say, to the college as well, like what's been the general feedback from them? Any kind of key, have you noticed, say, any particular areas where you maybe have found some of the feedback a little bit surprising in terms of that may have been an area you overlooked but has turned out to actually be important for a lot of the students who do go out there?
I guess the feedback is always so important to us, you know, from the students' perspective and from the placement providers and the clinical supervisors. That allows us really to, I guess, assess the whole process of the work that we do as well. So it allows us hopefully to monitor it as best we can and make changes where we need to. From the students' perspective, and I'm sure John will probably agree, maybe add to it, you know, there's obviously everyone has such a different experience, you know, they all kind of go through a similar, you know, process, but the learnings and the exact outcomes will obviously differ a little bit, and the development, but, you know, there's usually a difference in the students as well, you know, in relation to their own personal confidence. I think in relation to, you know, like a level 7 student going out, sitting in front of a client, you know, may come back after their 100 hours of practice placement at level 7 and say that, you know, their last session was very different from going out on their first session. You know, the confidence that they had, and learning about the process and procedures, about, you know, being able to liaise with their clinical supervisor, all that development, all that support, I think is, you know, stuff that really gets noted from the students as well. But I definitely think, seeing a growth in them professionally and personally with them as well, I think is a massive thing for us to see when they come back from their placement.
And anything you'd add to that, John?
Well, I think Dolores has covered nearly everything on that. I suppose if there was one thing I might add to that is that, and I think it's built on that word confidence that you used, Dolores. I think very much you can sort of feel that confidence of students in that they don't become complacent with their skills, because their skills are always developing and they're always learning as they go through this process. But certainly, the more familiar and sort of the more experience they have of working with clients and client presentations, which are very varied and very broad, knowing that they have the support, as we mentioned earlier, behind them as well, that they're not alone in this, I think really does help their confidence and their ability to become more competent practitioners. So, and that's not to say that some students will struggle, or that they'll find it difficult, or you know, that they won't have an absolutely positive experience. That's a natural part of the process too. But I think the important thing from our perspective is that you know, they know the college is there, they know the placements department is there, and they know they're not alone in that piece.
And even say from your own experiences, just kind of with the placement side of things, like what would be your number one piece of advice for students when they're going out on placement? So kind of they're getting ready to actually go out and just kind of work with the organization. So one maybe if each of you want to, like, if what would come to mind, what's your one piece of advice for them?
I think for me, the one thing I always do say to students is that, before they go on their placement, to allow ample amount of time to think about where they want to go on placement and to research it and to, make it kind of, I guess, to suit their learning needs as well. If they're on the addiction stream or the youth or the mainstream or CBT or integrative, that they find and source a practice placement that they feel will best help enhance their learning outcome as well.
And John, your one bit of advice?
I think from a clinical perspective, Danny, I think it's very important that students understand the program that they've been on for the past year or 2 years, whatever the case might be, and really absorb, a theory, really understand ethics, really be aware of good professional practice when they're going to talk to potential placement providers. So they're getting that message across that they've aligned themselves with a theory or theories, that they understand the importance of the therapeutic relationship, for example, and what all that it entails, and that the potential placement provider could trust them with the clients that come through their service. So it's very much trying to have confidence in your ability and understanding your program and being able to explain to a potential provider what it is you've studied, how you would apply it into practice, and being ethical and professional in all that you do.
So, thanks, and Dolores, for joining me today. And again, it was just great to get more insight from the practice placement side as well with the college, and especially kind of how important a role it has for a lot of the courses that are currently taking place there too.
Thanks, Danny. Thanks for having us.
Danny. Yeah, you're very good. Thanks for your time, Danny. Appreciate that.